everybody, it's Sierra, the Artsy Badger, and today we're going to be using dice again, but only one dice, the 12-sided dice, and we're going to be using Pinterest again. Now, I know that it looks like I'm going to do the Pinterest chooses what I draw challenge again, but instead I'm looking up color palettes, and I had to put 2 searches in to be able to find the kind that I wanted to use, and then rolling for a color scheme. So when I first thought up this challenge, I had these very specific kinds of color palettes in mind, the ones that have the little swatches of color with an image that it's inspired from. So I made sure that I got those when I was searching, which is why I had to put in 2 kinds of qualifiers. And so when I was thinking of this challenge, I figured I would pick one of these color palette selections, pick out Copic markers that match them the best, and let the color palette inspire what I draw. Quick note, in retrospect, there's a couple things I would have changed about the markers that I picked. I think that the second blue, like true blue color, should have been a lighter blue, but besides that, everything else was fine. The 2 blues were just almost too similar, pretty similarly dark, I would say. And then I didn't have anything that matched that sort of teal color in the middle quite perfectly, so I picked the one that I thought matched the best. And that's what I went with. Now, to talk a little bit more about this challenge. I was really excited by the idea of this challenge, but as I was opening up my sketchbook, thinking about what to draw, swatching the colors I picked out, I ran into the same issue I've been feeling a lot lately of just not being inspired by much of anything, and I was really hoping that the color palette would give me some inspiration, and it does in the end, but as I was swatching the colors and trying to come up with something to draw, all I could think about was how cool this would be to use in conjunction with another challenge. Like, instead of the 3 marker challenge, you would pick a color palette for something that you have already drawn, and then you have to color what you've drawn with whatever color palette gets picked. Or do the Pinterest chooses what I draw challenge, the poses, all that kind of stuff, and then have the last step be to pick one of these color palettes. Although I do think the color palettes can be very inspiring. As you can see here, I got a lot of sort of like witchy vibes from the color palette. Obviously with the blues and greens and the picture of the duck, I found my brain straying towards like aquatic scenes and that kind of stuff, but I really wanted to try and do something different and maybe slightly unexpected, and then I got this idea of a witch and doing some like rim lighting, and I couldn't get it out of my head, and so that's what I went with. Part of what inspired me to come up with a challenge like this is the fact that so many of the artists that I admire have those super limited color palettes, but for me personally, I have such a hard time picking and sticking to a particular color palette. Maybe I should just embrace that and do different color palettes for every drawing that I do, but it seems like part of what makes artists so consistent, such as Lee and Fran and many more people, is their color choices. I just feel like for a lot of artists, that is what is recognizable about their art, their color palettes and the way they put colors together and their color theory. I just really admire that. In particular with Lee, her color palette for probably the last year or so has been very heavy in warm tones like oranges and pinks, and those aren't colors that I typically like to work with, but I love her work. And then recently, kind of coinciding with her dyeing of her hair to green, she started adding in a bunch of cool tones. And it still looks so good, and I love it so much, and I want to have a color palette. And you know, with Fran, she has all the really pastel colors, and particularly pink and sort of like lilac-y colors. And it's just something that I find myself gravitating towards. Of course, I gravitate towards other kinds of art as well, but there's just something about that limited color palette that makes them seem so professional. that's kind of where this project or challenge idea originated from. I really want to practice using a limited color palette and being able to still create enough contrast and interest and focal points in my piece as possible. I think the problem I ran into, though, which you will see later in the coloring process, is that all of these colors are very similar in tone. You know, they're all cool colors. Although with Fran and with Lee, they definitely have certain colors that dominate their color palette, they almost always have a contrasting color in there. So even though Lee is using a lot of greens and blues now, she still has those bright oranges to bring attention to the focal point. And even with Fran, you know, pink versus purple and blue allows her to have warm and cool colors. I would argue that the greens are slightly warmer than the blues, so I did try to utilize that, but it was just a lot of the same, and it was really hard for me to pick what colors to go where and not put too many of the same tone next to each other. Of course, I tried to layer different colors with each other to create new tones that aren't even just in the 5 markers. Probably could have done more with that. Sometimes I would forget to use this color, the tealish color, because I decided I wanted to do sort of a rim lighting effect. I chose this color for my rim light and for the contents of the cauldron. And then after that, I just kind of set it off to the side and was like, okay, I can't use this color for anything else because it needs to be the most potent in this form. Like, it can't be pulled into other things because I need it to be a strong rim lighting. And I think that was the biggest mistake I made. I definitely should have brought it into more of the piece. I do end up bringing it into the little shoulder dragon that she has, and I think it helps set the shoulder dragon apart from her. Even still, I didn't do a great job with it. I need a lot more practice with sort of color theory and shadows and depth and dimension and that kind of stuff. But overall, I really enjoyed this challenge. I think I learned a lot, and I also feel very inspired to do other things with it, as I was mentioning. Like, I think it would be so fun to use this method instead of just drawing 3 markers. I think that would be really cool. Let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing that sometime. I'll put a little poll up in the corner. These little knickknacks were definitely the hardest part to color because I wanted them all to look different and stand out from each other, but I only had 5 colors to work with, and 2 of them were already in the cauldron, so that was a little hard. And then you'll see that I leave the skin for last. Originally, I was planning on making her skin the lightest of the 2 greens and making her very witchy. But as I was coloring in everything else, I realized I really needed those greens for other parts of the picture. And so after that, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just leave it white and just let the viewer's eye kind of fill in the colors as needed. But then I didn't want to color in the socks either. And then the sock and the leg just weren't broken up at all. So ultimately, I decided to cheat a little bit, which you'll see in a second, but I decided to bring in some ink washes. I have this water brush pen that I filled with some India ink a very long time ago, and it just kind of gives me a gray wash, and I decided that I would allow myself this sort of cheat, you might call it, because it's just adding depth. It's not adding any other color, and I don't think it takes away from the rest of the color, and I'm still using black, and I think black is totally okay in this scenario because you use it for the liner, but I wanted to add more tone to her skin because before I added the wash, it just seemed too light. And then after after I added the wash, it seemed a little too dark, so I decided to add a black background, and I think that actually really helped, and it helped with emphasizing the rim lighting and all that kind of stuff. But I don't really like the way the black within the swirly stuff worked out. I probably should have used the same wash gray, but that's okay. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this new challenge. Again, let me know in the iCard whether or not you want to see me do this in the different ways I mentioned. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next week.